right. Hi, everyone. So I'm Roland. I lead AI at Superhuman. I joined a few months ago. The company is really well known for building a very minimal, fast email experience, but we shifted priorities quite drastically recently. So I'm just going to walk you through the latest thing of what we've been putting in production and where we're going from there. So the overview is pretty much kind of like showing you what Superhuman is now and where we're going, but also how we try to solve some of the fundamental tasks. So right now, Superhuman, it's something like an uncluttered way of going through your emails really, really fast. So we wanted to have this very minimal and fast experience that runs locally, is super well indexed in your Chrome or locally, so that you can run through your emails with shortcuts, keyboard-based, offline or online. This is a quick example of some of the shortcuts and extensions we've been building. Is the ability to have your calendar and have your emails and other extensions like CRMs and other things within your email, so that it feels like an IDE more than just another messy productivity tool. With AI, okay, let's go. Right. With AI, we started in 2023 to start kind of like planning out, okay, these capabilities are coming up. How do we actually like plan these so that we can scale functionality with the capabilities of the models? So initially we started with simple one-step type of things. So here you can see the thread summarization and the instant reply features. So this is about another event that I had and kind of like summarizes the thread that always gets processed as new messages come in, and then for each message is going to be able to design these chips that are pretty much instant responses that don't contain that much information in them, but it's mostly kind of like, sounds good, doesn't sound good, tell me more. With Ask AI, we tried to go to the next step. So this is where we become more interactive with these models. So this is our chatbot interface, if you want to call it. We have like two views of it, the full screen and the smaller pop-up. So this is, for example, a way for me to kind of like ask about details that exist in my emails, but I don't really know which email, which thread, and who said it. So yeah, it's pretty much Perplexity for email, if you want to call it, but that's kind of like the starting point as people started like getting used to these like RAG applications, but moving more towards like agents that work in the background for you. So when we started working on this, we wanted to maintain some of the core differentiators, which would be super fast, tries to run as local as possible, and tries to kind of like get around some of the rate limits. So that made us think a bit more about like hosting everything on our end, but also having some type of like hybrid situation with the local indices as well as something like a vector database. Everything would have to be super fast and very thoughtful in the sense of we would rather ask a couple of clarification questions before giving an answer rather than giving the wrong answer. So in May, we started the beta program with a very simple way. We kind of like wanted to have this as a way for us to get a better understanding of like what type of questions people are asking. So we started with a very single chain approach where you have a single prompt that goes into the vector search database, and then that goes into like a answer synthesizer. So we are using Llama mostly for these like small bits that we want to run super fast. So this would be, let's say, time to last token like under half a second, kind of like use cases. And we're trying to also like use this type of metadata generation or like just like kind of like classifications as you go through the pipeline. So these like small classifications can trigger things later on in the pipeline. So we started with this where we just classify the task. Is it a question or is it something I can answer from my own knowledge, or do I have to search for it? And then a couple of like search parameters that we would apply in the heuristic ranking of the retrievals. and then going into GPT-4o. But obviously we had a couple of problems here. So we realized that these models are not really listening to instructions that well. So we're like, okay, how can we like make this a bit more controlled in terms of like we pretty much know that they're gonna do what we're telling them to do. And that's kind of like a combination of like how do you position the prompts with the contents and other like nudges throughout the pipeline. The date comparisons were another one. So if you're asking kind of like when is my next meeting, but then you have a couple of like meetings in the past, you wouldn't really know like, okay, what day, kind of like differentiating between like current date, future dates, and previous dates. And other things like finding flights and events, it's very interesting because most of these emails are like promotions. So if you get a lot of like summer promotions for flights, then like when you're asking when is my next flight, it's going to give you something like crazy, like Japan, like tomorrow. And so it was okay. How do we actually make it understand these things? Because they all sound very similar, and if it's in the context, it might just like answer with it. And they would not listen to the instructions of like make sure it's relevant, right? So it has to be something else. So then we kind of like went to design something a bit more complex, and this was where we started designing these like small nudges that kind of like propagate through the chain. So kind of like think of it of a neural network in a sense of like you have gates throughout the chain to kind of like like block certain signals. So we have like the first step, which is also like llama based, which is okay. We have a couple of like task classifications. So it could be searching via emails, calendars, retrieving emails without generating an answer, counting emails, which could be like more than 100 that wouldn't fit in a context, answering questions from the current thread versus something that you'd retrieve, things like that. So you have different examples in instructions for each that we couldn't really put in a single prompt. So you needed to have like this like type of like gates. So that would trigger then how you compose your prompt. So based on like which kind of like trajectories of the pipeline you take, the prompts get generated at the end with high-level instructions, answering instructions, and then semantically relevant examples, like few shots. Another interesting thing would be, okay, these few shots could be generated in production and then put back into the kind of like sanitized and then put back into the pipeline, so they get generated. They get like selected during inference, or we have a couple of other options here to kind of like design these like to be pretty clear in terms of like what to do and what not to do, not just like what to do. So we went with this approach where we will have the like prompt composition, but also having like something like user preferences, which are nudges of like what to actually listen to in the prompt, because the prompt may be kind of like a bit hierarchical, but then not everything is being listened to. So it's kind of like, oh, the user is asking about a flight event. Make sure it's not a promotion. Make sure that the date corresponds with the current date of the user, and so on. And a couple of like small functions that would be kind of like programmatic in terms of like the dates. Like this date is like 2 days after this, and things like that. And then like finally, we also like realized that the ChatGPT latest endpoints are more aligned with like following instructions than everything else. I'm not sure exactly what they changed, but it seems like this would be kind of like the most reliable. They're still like in developer mode, but this would become like more and more reliable to like listening to initial instructions rather than having to have like the nudges. And finally, we try to do something like a reflection loop, in the sense of like, if we detect some hallucinations, we could go either back into a second search, similar to like how Code Interpreter does it. So, okay, this code didn't work, let me try again. Or it could be something that we can like use in like just like fine tuning the system and be like, okay, like 20% of the answers are hallucinated, or things like that. In a way that we don't see the data exactly, but we know if it was a satisfying answer or not, because you cannot really expect all users to give you feedback. So speeding through what worked, this idea of like Matryoshka prompts, where you can like compose prompts in terms of like granularity. So you start with like high level like restrictions, guidelines, tone of voice, things like that, and then you go and more like more and more into the task itself with like concrete examples that are super relevant to what the user is asking. And this is kind of like how you're retrieving these like semantically or lexically. The other thing is like this like sandwiching of your retrievals. So you want to have like a guidebook at the beginning, then you want to have like your task at hand, which is kind of like the content, and then you want to have these kind of like guidelines, or not guides, but like nudges in terms of like make sure you do this and this and this. So you can like think of this as a, let's say like coding interview. You have like the lead code period that kind of like compresses the information in your head, and then you have the actual like interview question, and then you have the nudges or like the helpers throughout the interview to kind of like help you out how to solve these, just like reminders of like what type of concepts to use. So I kind of like found this like very interesting. And finally, it's just this idea of like briefing before answering. So this would be the idea of, okay, I'm not sure what I'm going to say. Better brief what I'm about to say and see if I continue like this or I do another search or something like that. And this is kind of like more aligning like user expectations of this is going to make sure that it's going to say something good rather than like I'm going to say something completely wrong with high certainty. And I think that's it. I don't think we have time for questions. But David? All right, I guess. Cool. All right, so I'm done.